and welcome to this episode of Attune In. I'm thrilled and extremely grateful to be joined today by Dr. Danielle Einstein. Good morning, Dr. Danielle Einstein.
And good evening to you.
Yeah, indeed, because you're joining us from Australia. I'm in London, and I'm just very, very grateful that you are. Obviously, it's crack of dawn for you. I'll just give a bit of a background. We met at a conference 2 weeks ago at King's. At Guy's campus. KCL put on a fantastic event, which you were part of organizing, digital well-being and child mental health, and I attended, and I was just very, very blown away by how rich the conversations were, and it was loaded with information from science, policy, and schools. And you gave some fantastic talks, and you mentioned a few things that really landed with me, which is why I asked you to come on to this podcast, because as you know, Tune In listeners are parents who just want to understand a little bit more about the science of connection, attunement, how to support a good self-esteem in children for the long game. And we have to think about technology and technoference and the impact screens and problematic use might be having on all of those things. So thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
So what I'm going to do is just read out your bio so listeners know about the things that you are doing and your expertise and experience. So Dr. Danielle Einstein is a clinical psychologist, researcher, and author with 3 decades of expertise. Is a renowned authority on the intersection of technology and anxiety. An adjunct fellow at Macquarie University, she actively researches the connection between device use and well-being. In 2024, Dr. Einstein provided critical evidence at the Australian Parliament Senate inquiry into the social media age legislation. Your work is in scrutinising the evidence and explaining the underpinnings of development-led global change. There's so much here, and congratulations on your contribution to such an important space, and thank you as a parent for what you are doing. So tell us about, how did this all start? What led you to this? Tell us about your journey.
Well, I am a clinical psychologist and a researcher, and also a mother who has actually witnessed what has gone on in this escalation of device use with teenagers. So not only have I been working and seeing clients that are teenagers and their parents, but I've also been working with schools looking at what could we do, because my theory of uncertainty about how people, young and vulnerable people, get taken advantage of when they don't like uncertainty made me question what was going to happen when schools started increasing administrative systems, which meant that they could send messages out to parents all the time. And also kids started to get phones from their parents, hand-me-down phones. I was actually worried about this factor, because we know that how a person handles uncertainty is really important to their future mental health and their developing of confidence, and they're not, in fact, getting anxiety, or if they get anxiety, getting over it really quickly. As the research was evolving, I was reading every research paper that was coming out, and whenever there was devices involved, I was emailing the researchers if I had any questions. So I kind of had a track of what all the holes in the research were, but what that meant is that because I was a researcher and a clinician, when the social media debate came out, I had just finished running programs with schools in which we were talking about this escalation anxiety and how everybody needs to change. Parents need to change their approach to anxiety. Even psychologists need to change their approach to anxiety so that we can help more people get over anxiety, instead of having children get stuck in anxiety and teenagers get stuck in anxiety. And parents also, we're seeing a rise in anxiety. So I was well versed in explaining what was going on. We just put a book out which really separated the topic into 14 different chapters, or actually more, and slowly explain to everyone what is needed to combat anxiety. And then from there, and from my research, I made submissions to our government, and I started reading what everyone else had submitted. And also, because of my research where we did change a bit of social media use, I got contacted by our former Chief Justice of Australia, who was looking at what regulation could be put in place. So I got involved in the Australian debate at every single level, I think it was, that there was. And I just kept steering and pushing everybody to look at the right information. So I just really looked at all the evidence, broke it into bits, and presented it to my colleagues and to doctors in Australia, and then to the politicians. And I got it behind the scenes to the politicians. And then I trapped it down. Sorry, this is a long story, but I trapped it down then, kept educating behind the scenes. But when it came to that final Senate committee inquiry into the law, the tech platforms didn't realise what I had been saying. So I then came up against advocates and other researchers, and I was very strong and able to explain my theory of uncertainty, what the evidence actually is, and really clearly say that we do not need social media for mental health, which is really the argument that everybody has been listening to and everyone has been so afraid of. There's just been this, and I think the tech platforms and other people just thought, well, as long as people think they need social media for their mental health, we can't do anything in terms of putting regulation in place. So I guess my role was to sort of say to the world, hang on, we do not need social media for mental health. That is a false argument. Here's the reasons why. And then from there, once Australia passed that law, the rest of the world went, hang on, why is Australia doing this? How can they do this? And then that's now where we're seeing the rest of the world starting to look at what can be done. Let's all put our heads together to make changes, and let's not accept the status quo, because it is leading to increased anxiety and increased depression and so many problems. Sorry, that's a long answer to your question.
Dev, you don't need to say sorry. I mean, what stamina. And I just love the stamina that you've shown. And really, what I'm really hearing from you is this quest for understanding. And you wanted to understand, if something felt counterintuitive, you dug deep. And I suppose in some ways that is exactly the challenge for parents who are on the ground in their homes. 21st century modern day parenting, I always sort of have so much sympathy and empathy for us. I have 3 children, they're under 12 and they're all under 12, and often in a household there'll be 2 working parents, and I see it all the time. And the work I do, I would say digital technology and sort of screens are one of the biggest complicating factors for building authentic emotional connection. We need to think about how can we support parents with understanding the facts. And you went on this sort of mission to understand. And I think that is exactly what would help parents, is having those facts and having the layers of understanding, because I genuinely believe parents are doing the best they can with the knowledge they have. And there is a genuine confusion. There are genuine confusions with parents that actually, I don't want my child to miss out on friendships. I don't want my child to miss out on group conversations. And that is an anxiety for parents. And that drives the decision to kind of hand down their old iPhones or whatever. But actually, what you're saying is we need to completely question that premise that building friendships and connections can only happen online. When I was growing up, I was not building connections and friendships online. I can say that very happily. And I also struggle to accept that argument. But I think for parents, it is that uncertainty as well.
And I think what I'd say to you is that it's not about whether it's on the word online itself is a misdirection. Okay. For social media, it's just, should it be via social media to a group of people at once, and including people you don't know? Okay. That's what social media permits, encourages. In fact, that's fun. And we all know what it was like and what it's like to go to a party and meet a whole lot of new people. It's fun. So I'm not disputing that it's fun. But in terms of what creates really deep connections, it's actually the one-to-one communication. Or if you're in a safe, secure group, then it might be being part of a small group, but with people you know, and not completely transient where it's changing all the time, but actually developing friendships, developing that ability to talk to people when things go wrong, ability to create new memories with people. And when it comes to child development and teen development, it's just so important that teenagers are out and about in the real world, being able to learn how to handle frustration, learning that not everybody likes them, but they can still get through, getting the little lift that they get when you talk to someone new, and you're brave enough to look them in the eye and ask them a little bit about their own day. And instead of thinking, oh, I can't do that, but I've got this safe support group on my phone, which I'm going to lean to instead because I feel a bit nervous here. Or
Mm.
or alternatively, I've got a game and that's how I handle how I'm feeling right now. I'll just block the fact that there's someone sitting next to me on the bus. I'm going to play a game instead, or I'll watch this video instead. Why would I make conversation? So, we're seeing a loss in social skills that's really coming through at university and when teens or young adults get to their first jobs.
Well, that's really powerful for parents to be hearing. So the adolescent brain obviously goes through that sort of pruning and the re-architecture of it, and it's a very impressionable time in terms of the sort of human life course. It is a significantly impressionable time, and as you've said, that's when children should, those neurons should be sort of connecting, which correspond to actual connection and responding and turn taking and conversation and eye contact, or if that's not how people want to connect, that's fine as well. But certainly, reducing it all to a rectangular thing, it will be impacting how parts of the brain develop and actually what are the long-term implications. And obviously, we don't really know, but we're all in a bit of a study here because it's very difficult to predict, but the clinical and scientific instinct doesn't feel good.
Well, yeah, I'd say to you that it's about creating opportunities. And the big problem with the phone in your pocket or on the bus is that it's too easy to miss an opportunity. So for a child or a teenager, we want, in fact, an adult, we want people to feel little bit bored, to be looking out the window, to have sparks of creativity and thought, which is what we have when we're pleasantly bored, but also to be then willing and looking and hungry for a conversation with someone who's near them. To be happy to make eye contact because that's going to keep me busy, or to start a conversation, and then to learn that they can handle it. And that's how you actually overcome anxiety. So the key to anxiety developing and becoming a problem is actually avoidance. And that's where a phone is a natural kind of avoid magnet. It provides the crutch which stops a teenager or an adult, in fact, working out that they're okay. And it's become socially acceptable to use your phone to avoid starting a conversation or to get out of a conversation, to escape something that's making you uncomfortable. And
Mm.
I think when we're talking about teenagers and what we're doing for parents, one element of this is to think about the fact that you don't want to be giving your child or young teenager the ability to escape straight away. And so that's why you might look at a flip phone, or even some parents are looking at no phones, but not a smartphone, not a little portable computer that is a distraction, that does allow that avoidance. We want things that are really extremely basic as your child is out and about in the real world, because that's where those learning opportunities are going to be important.
I love that. I just want to sort of summarize some of it because that was so helpful. So, what really stuck out for me, hearing what you just said, is that it is like a magnet. So, there is an element of autonomy just goes out the window. It's not an intentional, conscious decision. It's literally like a magnet, like a paperclip to a magnet. And it's in the child's pocket or the teenager's pocket. And as we're talking about teenagers, social anxiety is actually normal for teenagers because obviously they are becoming less sort of the attachment with parents and family starts to dilute in order to make space for those social peer connections, because which is a normal part of healthy development. But as a result, they are going to be potentially more anxious than they were before. As a result, this magnet is just too easy. There's not enough resistance. Some of these brick phones, they're actually quite annoying to kind of get into. They're not easy to use, but the smartphones are so easy. They're so enjoyable to swipe. And as a result, that resistance isn't there. So actually, if we have a teenager whose baseline is a little bit anxious anyway, then there's this magnet pulling them to their phone. And as you say, it's now socially acceptable. So no one's going to think there's anything wrong with that. We're kind of removing those opportunities for healthy interactions, which is how their anxiety is going to come down, is basically the summary, I think. And that's such an important message for parents to hear. So thank you for sort of describing it. And in terms of just as a parent, I think no one's going to disagree that, long-term well-being and long-term thinking around mental well-being is a good thing. I think there's disagreements on the causes of the problems, and there's a lot of parents I think that kind of don't want to believe that these rectangular smartphones can be as big a problem as they are, and then they lean on different explanations. But I sort of feel what's helpful is just to lean on those universals that whatever side of the debate we're on, I don't think anyone from the parenting or educator space is going to disagree that we want the best for brain development, for self esteem, for well being for our children. So,
Mm.
what I'd like to ask you is from your research and all the digging around you've done, what are the sort of key findings, the key messages that you think are so helpful for parents to understand so that they can make a more informed judgment and a more informed decision around how they're going to manage this?
I'd say that there are actually different sorts of problems that we might see in terms of our teenagers, and it actually depends on what those problems are as to what parents are going to do. So, but I would like to almost preface it by saying that when I think about misinformation and the fact that there's a bit of confusion. The first step at home is to have any parents agree on what the problem is. So parents, and when I say the problem, I think in part it's our denial that tech has been built to be addictive and that it has an addictive pull. Right. So parents agree that it has an addictive pull, like the magnet we talked about. And I've got a little video online that I encourage people to watch, which shows how that addictive pull is built up. But once parents agree that it's addictive, then parents can recognize their own being pulled in to using tech all the time in front of their children, even at the dinner table, for example, or the moment that they walk into the house to pull out the phone and check their emails to see, am I wanted? Am I needed? Does that make me feel good? Is there something I need to catch up on quickly? Because there's both the addictive element, which is the high you get when there's something interesting and new waiting for you on an email, for example. But there's also the low that a person gets when there's nothing there, which makes them look even more on their phone and on their device for another high. And that's how we get stuck into this cycle. Once everybody recognizes that that's what's going on, then we can put really healthy habits in place at home. And the fact is, kids copy what we do. They don't listen to what we say. So if we want to start by setting really healthy boundaries, parents do need to recognize this and make their own small changes as well. Like, this is not an element where we can go, okay, the government's going to bring in regulation and that's enough. This is an element, this is an area where we've got everyone needing to make small changes, which starts with recognizing this addictive pull. So the first thing I'd say is, if you and your partner or your child's other parent really disagree, that actually is a concern.
Mm.
I had a really interesting chat with some people I was staying with in London, where the father had brought a phone jail and he wanted it to be used during dinner. And the mum said to me, Look, Danny, this is what my partner's brought. I think this is ridiculous because we should be able to have our phone in front of us and just not reach it.
Mm.
And I think that sort of highlights this disagreement and lack of recognition that actually, no, the phone actually does have this addictive pull. I think that when you're getting started on this journey, it's a great idea to put phones away, out of reach and out of sight, not in a child's pocket or a parent's pocket, and just in another room. You don't necessarily have to have a phone jail, but it should be parked during meal time, somewhere where nobody can see it, and hopefully also hear it, unless you happen to have an aging parent or some, really important reason to have your phone on, but then just have it loud enough, but again, out of sight, so it's not tempting to look at. So we've got to, once you start with recognizing that, we can make these small changes. Another change that I'd recommend is no tech use in bedrooms. Okay, so tech savvy families, anyone who works from the tech industry, whenever I've spoken to them and they've been involved in a project, they actually have really hard rules at home and they don't have tech in bedrooms. Now, that means really having to rethink how the portability of our devices and where are they sitting. An extension to that is when I was talking in Australia last year, I was explaining that not all teens will straight away get off social media. And we weren't even, and in Australia, we haven't included gaming. However, in the UK, you are thinking about gaming, which I think is excellent. But what that means is, we're not cancelling the internet. There's still plenty of addictive features on the internet or ways that savvy teens will get around rules. So we want to keep conversations open between parents and kids so that teenagers are still coming to parents when they're encountering a problem online. Having said that, let me just say that when we filmed teenagers just before our regulation came in, they were saying it's so much easier to look on my phone than to go to my parent. It's actually, I know it's better for me to go to my parent. I know the phone makes me feel worse when I'm on social media, but it's just too easy to go to my phone and that online support group than to go to my parents. So there's this real gap between the insight that I should put it down and go out to my parent and the fact that they won't. But anyway, my point is that for parents and teens, once they've acknowledged this addictive pull, you can say, okay, let's get anything that's addictive onto one computer that you're using in one place in the house. Okay. So if it was social media, still one place in the house, one computer, so that the teenager is making an active choice to go there rather than using it all the time, being drawn in all the time. The same with gaming, the same with whatever it is that's still going on. Put it on one device in one place in your house, because what happens is otherwise the location, and the bedroom is often the location, just becomes associated with using these methods to make you feel good, make a teenager feel good, and also to manage themselves when they're feeling bad, which takes away from them doing other things like reading, like painting, I would even say a phone call to someone on a basic phone is healthier when you're trying to calm yourself down than being on some sort of addictive platform, which gives a child an audience, a big group then provides an audience to their misery. We don't want an audience to misery. We want guidance and help when someone's feeling bad so that they move through it, get listened to, but then move to what to do next. I'll stop there, Gary, in case you've got some questions.
Good. So many amazing tips. I love that. I mean, that is so practical and it makes so much sense. It's just way too easy if this thing is portable, but if it's just a static, monitor somewhere and they've got to get up and go to it, then maybe they won't. Maybe they'll just go, actually, I won't check. I'm going to just look at the trees outside and I'm going to connect with nature. How about that? The point is this stuff is just occupying. It's a little bit like, in a shoe, there's only space for 1 foot in the shoe. And if it's occupied by something else, then all of the other stuff like, music, laughing, playing cards, actually connecting in real life, hugging, there's no room and there's no time if it's being occupied by this magnet pull all the time. And what I think is really powerful is that this is a biological process, isn't it? It's the sort of dopamine system, it's the reward pathway, which is all about motivation. And, we're all born with a system in our brains which makes us want to do things again. And this issue is sort of occupying that space. What we should be doing again is spending time in nature, exercise, laughter, music, creativity. But all of that's going to kind of be, it's going to be sidestepped.
But yeah, and one step that I want to add to that, Gary, just is understanding that it's the room itself will make it all of a sudden it acts as though there are all these polarizing magnets in it, drawing the person to the phone. So it's not just the phone, all right, the smartphone or the iPad or the tablets. It's the room itself starts to become associated with the fact that this is where I do this. This is where I experience this fun, this connection, this way of calming myself down. And so what we're trying to break is the association with the bedroom that the bedroom has for the teenager to do that. So and a practical tip I'd put on there is don't just say no tech in bedrooms, but make sure then that your teenager has a book a
Yeah.
physical book, go to the library, get physical books, get them back there so that it's not, so that actually there is an alternative. And also for us as parents, we need to get back to the library and to be borrowing books and to be setting the example. And that's where it comes to us having the discussion with our partner or whatever parent there is that's in the family, because the other part of this to remember is that children and teens are built to be savvy, and they will play the weakest parent,
Yeah.
and they will. So so you have to be very aware that it's not all right. Like if only one of you has a strong view and the other person has a weaker view, of course, in a world where teenagers are doing all their communication online, they're going to go to the other parent. So we are trying now, we're on a mission to change norms. Okay. We're on a mission to change our children in schools and the friends with whom they connect with. That's why we have organizations, and you do as well. I'll talk about yours. You have Smartphone Free Childhood. You have Set at 16. You have all these different organizations which aim to help connect parents with one another so that they can change experiences around their younger teenagers. And I think that we do actually need to recognize that there is power in multiple people doing this at once. So if you go back to the relationship that each parent has with their teenager, there are some other factors that I'll mention in a sec. I'll let you summarize and then I'll come back to how else do we build these relationships.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And as a parent, the summary for me on that point is we have a lot of sympathy for parents because they are uncomfortable but what you're saying is come together, realize that actually your all best interest is of parental instinct. And yet we're kind of feeling like we're sleepwalking into a situation that's going against that instinct. And yet, because of the masses, it's very difficult for a parent to probably it comes down to parental confidence or, the sort of uncertainty piece that we were talking about. But actually, what you're saying is come together. There are these organizations. And, from the conference that we met at, there were some fantastic examples of stories where schools have proactively really sort of ascended into another plane with this topic. And it started with parents coming together and sharing their concerns. So I think what I kind of want to bring here is that we need to have a non-judgmental attitude to what's happening. No one's choosing to have a dopamine reward pathway. No one's choosing that there's this magnet effect. No one's choosing that as a parent and a family system. If you're finding yourselves in a situation where you are struggling to manage this with boundaries, it's causing too much irritability. I speak to parents where putting boundaries down with these devices creates so much irritability in the child that they are exhausted. They're coming in from work. They've got so many other things to do. And it's the path of least resistance. So I think we do need to come together and realize that the long-term game is really important and to have some sympathy and empathy for us as parents.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, parenting is the hardest job, and parenting and working to make ends meet means that often parents need to use their devices to get things done. And that in itself can lead to almost a little bit of anxiety in terms of I am just used to getting things done very quickly. I can do things very quickly. Let me just do it now. And that kind of helps, like that almost pulls parents into that mistake of always being on their own device in front of their children. And that's where I think we need to come together as parents and recognize what are some small changes that I can make. Where am I going to put my limits? So it might be that I'm only going to work at certain times in the evening. I am going to now quarantine some time off, and I am going to sit down and watch television even with my teenager or my partner. And that treads into this question of what's happened in the last few years where people have become almost a little bit less flexible with what they're watching on TV. So there are many families where a parent is just so exhausted that they only have their one show that they want to watch, and they don't want to therefore listen to what a teen wants to watch. And the teens also, I want to watch this, and I'm not going to sort of bond and listen and watch with dad or with mum. And actually,
Mm.
that's something we've got to counter, because watching things together when everybody is tired is actually a nice way of bonding. It's a good way to have a little bit of laugh, and watching without a device in our hands that where we're being distracted, where actually we are watching this together, is valuable. So I'd sort of say on the front of parents being exhausted, and that yes, I'm fully empathic with the fact that we will have times where parents need to be working, but try and think about not allowing that to be 24/7 and having some boundaries. And for instance, I like to think about, like, for example, cooking. Don't cook with your computer near you or your phone near you. Put some music on in the background, or the radio on in the background if you want something in the background, so that if a teenager's coming into the kitchen, they're entering into a space where you're available, you're listening, they can hear what you're listening to. And vice versa. I think it's important for teens when they're in the living areas also to be sharing what they're choosing to do rather than having a headset on. I don't think headsets should be automatically acceptable around the whole house or the whole home. So just little habits that we can actually think of changing. There are times also where we need to think about, when you're making changes in a home, to think about the fact that it's really important that we don't shame children and teenagers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the conversations about screen time, about what's going on social media, about what's going on in terms of device use and boundaries, they need to happen one-on-one in private.
Mm.
Now, often as parents, we're actually in a rush to get through those instructions. And so we think, okay, let's just have it as a family conversation at the dinner table. But actually, if a teen's having any sort of difficulties, and in those early teenage years where they are separating from parents and they really do feel vulnerable to shame, and
Mm.
really do feel self conscious about what's going on, it's important for parents to take it much more slowly and make those times one on one, going for a walk, going for a drive, even I would say talking in bed and bringing back the nighttime good night conversation,
Mm.
which we had prior to smartphones coming in. It's only since smartphones and teens having their own laptops that those nighttime good night conversations have, in many families, disappeared, because of course a teenager would rather be chatting with their friend many times, or playing a game, or whatever it is they're doing, maybe even saying that they're doing homework whilst talking to other people, but just that preference to be social, which then wires them up just before bedtime, which then causes problems with sleep. All those habits have only come since we've had these portable devices in bedrooms. So if you are making changes at home, if parents are making changes at home, a really good change to think about is, as I said before, get all tech out of bedrooms. And also, a good indicator that you've done that is your teenager will be happy to have you come in and say goodnight.
Absolutely. No, I love that. And that's a really compassionate sort of perspective that, the teenagers are going to be, sensitive to shame. And we do need to have a tactful strategy, which acknowledges for them that this isn't easy for them. This magnet pull, this is really, really hard. And I think your point that you made a few times, which I also love, is that there needs to be something else. So it can't just be that we're going to dilute and remove, or whatever the family decides to do. You said a few times, bring in something else, like put the music on, or have those shared moments where you're watching something funny together. So because that hunger for stimulation and that dopamine system, it needs to go somewhere. Okay. And so we don't want it to go straight to the devices or the screens, but then what will it go to? And part of this is about, we should be able to, as parents, we should appreciate that being bored in itself is not a problem. and, having space and time for children just to think their thoughts and not have a structure around that is really, really powerful for their cognitive and emotional development. And at the same time, there should be other activities. I mean, our daughter loves Lego, and I noticed that she was getting into it in a way that she really was almost, I wouldn't say addicted, but she wanted to keep playing. And I could see she was drawn to that Lego. So, that's great. There will be other things our children can be drawn to, and we need to make that easy with less resistance. Otherwise, this magnet pull is going to win, basically.
One of the concerns that's come up with as we become more aware of all the harms on social media, predators, sextortion, all the different things that can go very, very badly wrong. Parents have become more nervous and more scared. And therefore, if a teenager's using a device in front of them, they're more likely to look over their shoulder. And actually, that sort of goes in the face of encouraging your teenager to kind of own their screen use, do it in one place, and then reach the parent and go to the parent when there's a problem. So I think there's this balancing act of giving your child the privacy, but also the location for them
Mm,
to use their own device to stay on top of what the overall screen time is. Because I do think we need to be very aware of overall screen time and trust in the relationship you have with your child, which means that that's another reason why we've got to handle our own technoference and our own being drawn into working all the time or whatever it is that we're doing on a device all the time that makes us find it difficult to put things down and be open when our children or teenagers are coming to us. So the more we can, like this next phase in 2026 is about all of us making small changes that build connection in our families and that build boundaries around the way that we work and the way that we use our devices. And that once everybody's making these small changes, we can move forward, I think.
yeah,
I
I love
hope.
that. I love that. And I could not agree more, and this kind of almost is a bit of a summary to a serious take home summary is as parents, we really need to invest some thought and energy and time into that emotional connection with our children, because that then our children will be telling us if there's anything untoward going on with predators, as you've mentioned. There are some serious risks in the online spaces that our children are in. And as a parent, we want to feel and know for a fact that our children would tell us. Now, if children feel shamed or they're being observed with a parent looking over their shoulder, really the message there is, well, my parent doesn't trust me. And what does that mean? That's going to impact the quality of that emotional connection. And that will impact the quality of that communication, which is the opposite of what us parents want. So, what you're saying is, give them a bit of privacy. You're respecting their autonomy. You're actually showing respect. And that is a very pro relationship feature. That is only going to embed and support a healthy relationship. And I think having that honest dialogue where children can say openly, I'm struggling. I wish I wasn't on my whatever so much. And, we're on the same team here rather than this combative dynamic, which is basically what I see a lot of. At the end of the day, parent and child, ideally, we're on the same team. But the reality is, this technoference and this pull is putting parent child on different teams. And I think that's what we need to completely shift. And I think some of that comes with children understanding the dopamine system, the pull. And so they're not feeling shamed. I mean, we can't be ashamed of our dopamine system. No one chose that, right?
Yeah, what I'd say is it's not the dopamine system and the addictive pull means it's not about understanding, it's about putting limits in place. It's about recognizing. So I think when we lean too much into this is all educational, we can do this all by education, then what we don't do is make the physical changes that are needed in our home and in our habits. It's about recognition. We recognize that these devices and these hits in dopamine give us this addictive pull. And that once we recognize that, then we realize that it's really hard to fight it. So let's put some really strong habits in place and have some tech free zones. For example, schools are getting tech free zones and putting them in. But in our homes, we might say, well, the family room is an area where we're not going to be also on our phones. If you want to make a phone call or be on your phone, you go out of the family room and you use that somewhere else. So it's recognizing that the dopamine pool is going to be wherever you are, but not thinking that that's enough without also setting up some habits and some practices that we agree as a family to put in place. And the parents then model, parents then do themselves. That's the really important part.
Understood. So really just a brief summary, it's the both and. So the knowledge is great, but we need the actual boundaries as well. And I think from my perspective, I've noticed with children, when boundaries are placed without logical explanation, it doesn't land in a sustainable way. I feel that children are more likely to sustain a boundary or a limit when it makes sense to them and they can understand in their own narrative at their developmental age, what's going on. But that alone isn't enough. There needs to be the education and the boundaries and the limits and the practical sort of structures that need to change.
Yeah, that's right. Just when we were talking before about the privacy element of respecting your child's privacy and not looking over their shoulder while they're online, there is an element though when a child is starting on social media, if your child is going to start on social media, that it's very important to set up some shadowing period where a parent is also signed on under the same account and can watch what's going on every second day at first, and then moderating it to be just twice a week and then once a week, and then just being aware of what's going on in particular stressful periods like in the lead up to exams, or if there's a big camp or holiday coming, just to have a look, or a big party, checking in and looking for some sort of warning signs and understanding how your own child is holding themselves online. So we both see what we've seen in these early secondary school years is a lot of bullying and a lot of what I would call relational aggression. So Dr. Judith Locke and I wrote about this in our book, and we talk about how it's just the subtle way that young people are mean to one another. And as a parent, you will see that and witness that. And you can look at what's going on, both in terms of the way your child is treating other people, as well as the way that they are being treated. So there's quite few different things that a parent can look out for. And I run through the whole list now, but rather just be aware that it is important at the beginning to understand how your child is approaching the conversations, the group conversations, because group dynamics bring out sometimes the worst in us. Okay, there's a fight to be at the top of the group, and there's a little bit of an argument for those at the top to remain at the top. So if your child is more towards the bottom, they're susceptible to all sorts of unkind messages and treatment that can occur. But similarly, if they're in the middle and feeling threatened about losing their spot, they're likely to be pulled in to
Mm.
being a little mean. And it is time for parents to kind of really understand what their child is learning about how to treat others. So I think there is still a role for a shadowing period at the beginning of their journey.
Thank you for clarifying that. I think that's really, really important. And I assume you mean with the child's kind of understanding. So not behind their back, not in a covert way, in a way that maintains that respect and openness, but as almost like a guardian. And that's actually really important. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. It's just part of living in your family that's how these things start up, and that's part of it. And there are some other little expectations that parents should put on teens as well when it comes to um, their device use and them showing maturity for their device use. So they should be in part paying for their phone plans. They should be contributing home in terms of chores. We need to be sure that they're looking after their own self care, brushing their teeth, eating meals. We know that the tech use and too much tech use can mean that teens are no longer even aware of their own hunger and they push through their own hunger.
Right.
So there's this balance of making sure that our teenagers and children are stepping up and not in a world where they're not having to step up and that they're just this lifestyle of not sort of avoiding responsibility, avoiding helping, and that maturity that comes. I'm sure you've talked about this in other places with other guest speakers, but that maturity that comes from contributing to the home, contributing to neighbours, being responsible is part of what needs to be lifted at the same time as they're getting access to any devices in your home.
Love that. No, thank you for reminding us because, it makes so much sense. And yeah, I think parents, we do need to hear that in exactly those words because I feel like the tide just takes, there's a momentum and there's a tide. And actually, no, the chores, the responsibility, the empathizing, the being a supportive member of the community, all that needs to ramp up. And we need to accept that brain maturity, the brain continues to mature well into the 20s. And so our children need our guidance and they need those limits and those boundaries. So, well, thank you so much, Danielle. It's been such a rich conversation. I love all the practical tips. I don't even know how I'm going to summarize them, but what's really landed for me is your clear points about making sure that there's education plus the strategies, that we're building emotional connection. We want children to be telling us about what's going on, thinking about the structure of the home and having one room or one desktop. We're not saying no technology, we're not saying no to screens, but we're thinking about how can we optimize well-being, joy and emotional connection in our family systems alongside these very, very sort of pulling features. And yeah, just so much caution, I think, that we need to be thinking about as parents. And obviously, you've done so much and you have a lot of resources. So, how can parents find out more about what you've written? You've mentioned a book, and I know you've got a website, but how can parents find out more about what you're doing?
Well, through the website, I've got a really lovely infographic that parents can download and put on their fridge, which is like the flower that shows all the ways that development needs to build. So that's a nice way of explaining the changes that we need to put in place with your partner and with your kids, and almost having it as, okay, this is what we're aiming for here. But we've also got our book Raising Anxiety, which is why our good intentions are backfiring on children and how to fix it. And that sets out all the different steps that we need to put in place and also what to look for in a psychologist, and how to handle anxiety, your own anxiety as a parent, as well as how to support your child if they've got some anxiety, and really cause out all the issues that I've now called out in public. So,
Yeah,
but thank you very much for having me, Gary.
no, it was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you so much.